Okay, welcome to Chapter 4 of your textbook, Carbon and the Molecular Diversity of Life. I want to remind you, I didn't say this in the last videos, but I've said it in class, that when you're finished taking notes on these videos, please write down any questions that you have. Obviously the good thing about doing the notes outside of class is that we can do the tough stuff in class and you can ask questions. The problem is you may not remember the questions that you had. That's the good thing about doing notes in class is that right then when you have a question, you can ask it. So please do write things down as you go. And then I'll give you a chance in class to ask those. This is all about carbon and how that element is important in life and the diversity of life, how all things are different. So organic chemistry is a study of chemistry that is all based on carbon. I had to take an organic chemistry class in college. Most people do. I'm pretty sure that Mrs. Brown teaches some organic chemistry in her Chem 2 class. She really enjoys organic chemistry, although I didn't find it super exciting when I took it in college. So usually when we talk about organic compounds containing carbon, that carbon is usually bonded to hydrogen. That's what makes something organic. It's not because it was grown without pesticides, although that's a different kind of organic. Organic chemistry is a study of chemistry focused on all the organic compounds. And the reason we talk about it in life, in biology, is because life is made out of carbon. So these are some of the organic compounds that you see commonly. Methane, you notice that the carbon is bonded to the 4 hydrogens. If we turned on the gas in, say, Mr. Lloyd's room, or in the chemistry lab, that's the gas that's going to be produced. Let's see, what else? There wasn't anything else super exciting in that one. But you can see these 3 different organic compounds all have carbon at their root, and it's bonded to hydrogen. A biology one that you're going to see a lot of is glucose. That is an organic compound. Some experiments have supported the idea that abiotic synthesis, so non-living is what abiotic means, non-living synthesis or making, okay, or producing. When you synthesize something, you're making it. Of organic compounds, so things that are found in living things, could have been an early stage of the origin of life. Scientists have always tried to figure out how did the first cell come about, and they look at there is a possibility that some inorganic compounds, inorganic or organic, could have produced organic compounds. The most famous experiment with this is the one by Stanley Miller, and I'm not really sure how to pronounce his last name, Urey, maybe? Concluded that it is possible to create organic compounds that are required for life. So think about things like sugars, proteins, and along the lines of sugars, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are just complex sugars from inorganic compounds. So things maybe like nitrogen or hydrogen or just simply oxygen that would have existed on early Earth. So the big question here is, what does early Earth look like? Well, we don't really know, but Stanley Miller and Harold Urey, they basically took assumptions of what they think early Earth's atmosphere probably looked like, or what it was comprised of. And because of that, they took what they think early atmosphere was comprised of, some methane, ammonia, some hydrogen, and they created this experiment or this chamber where you have the water, or the ocean, and that makes water vapor, and they put in some electrodes, think lightning strikes, something that could have provided electricity or an electrical energy shock that would take the water vapor and all of these chemicals that would have been in the atmosphere, and they can actually produce organic compounds. Okay, they've shown that they can do this. Can they do it many times repeatedly? Well, they have. It took a very long time to make this happen successfully, but they've shown that it is, remember the word, possible. Doesn't necessarily mean it did happen. It just means it's possible to do that. Carbon has 4 points of bonding, so it's actually very versatile. That's why carbon is very common in living things. Molecules are three-dimensional, even though we draw them sometimes as, something like this. They actually have dimensions to them. And you probably know that because I'm thinking in chemistry, they probably need to build some molecules with balls and sticks. Remember, this concept was introduced in Chapter 2, and that's really important to the overall idea of biochemistry, is that the shape of the molecule determines its function. If that shape is not right, or misshapen, or there's an error in it, that will could alter its function. Carbon skeletons can be branched, straight, or rings. Well, why is that important? Well, that just brings about many different shapes. I'll show you some pictures of those right here. So this is going to be just these linear branches of carbon. And then carbon can also produce rings. They talked about here, they mentioned branched, straight, or rings. So you've got, your straight, your branched, and then your rings. And because of that, carbon can form all kinds of shapes. Well, why is that important? Remember, shape determines function. And so if you have more available shapes, you have more possible functions. Isomers are kind of important. Isomers are compounds that have the same number of atoms of the same elements, but different structural properties, and therefore are different in their properties. Now, remember, I just said that shape determines function. Okay? Shape, this is an important concept, determines function. Well, even though you might have two compounds that are made out of 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens, if the shape isn't right, it's not going to do the same thing that glucose does. Enantiomers are isomers that are mirror images of each other. Okay? For example, and this is kind of cool, ibuprofen and albuterol are enantiomers and have very different effects. If you are familiar with either of these, ibuprofen is a painkiller, and albuterol is actually something that is used in asthma patients. It actually helps with the constricting of the bronchioles, the airways. So very different effects. If you had a headache, you would not want to take albuterol. And if you were having an asthma attack, I don't think ibuprofen would necessarily help you. They are enantiomers, which means that they are made out of the same elements. They have the same number of elements, but they're actually mirror images of each other. And because the shape is different, the effect is different, or the function is different. Usually when you have enantiomers, one is active inside the body and the other is not. So one is, in living things, is active, but not in others. Even a slight difference in a shape can have a large impact on whether it works inside the body or works inside any living thing, not just, we branch out and not just think about humans. And so, remember, I said shape equals function. Even a slight difference in that shape can have a really big impact on how it functions. So here is you don't have to know the difference between cis and trans isomers. The cis isomers, though, show X just indicates any kind of other compound attached to it. For example, it might be CH3 or NH2 or something. They have the basic same structure here, but cis, they're on the same side. Trans, they're like this. That doesn't really matter. It just matters that they basically have the same structure. So those are structural isomers, and enantiomers, which is what we were talking about, are mirror images of each other. So you'll notice that all of these are the exact same. So same elements, same amounts of those elements, so they're in the same ratios. But this one has this group here on this side, and then this one has it on the other side. So they're actually mirror images of each other. Think about like your hands are the same, but they're mirror images. And this is showing that drug, ibuprofen, and then albuterol. And you can see that they literally are mirror images. If you took this one and put it on top of that one, you would have to flip it over to put it on top, because if you just laid it over the way it is now, this part would be over here. So you'd have to flip it, kind of like your hands. And then the same thing with albuterol. If you put them on top of each other, this part would be over here, which wouldn't be good. You'd actually have to flip it to put it on top of it. Functional groups are important groups of molecules that are important in biological processes. Each participates in a chemical reaction in a specific way. Page 64 to 64, figure 4.9, it might be 64 to 65, I can't remember. That might be a typo. To see these, you don't need to memorize them, but do be familiar with some of these functional groups, because they will play a role in like photosynthesis and cellular respiration and some other chemical reactions we talk about throughout the year. I don't think the AP exam is going to ask you a question where you have to identify the structural functional group. However, you will have on some of your quizzes where you have to identify whether something is a protein or it is a carbohydrate, and some of that will be based on what functional groups it actually has with it. So, for example, things you might understand is like sulfohydryl group. That's going to have a sulfur in it, and none of the other ones are. Proteins are made up of amino acids. And when we get to protein synthesis and building proteins, we talk about amino acids and how amino acids contain carboxyl groups and amino groups. Those are two things that are very easy to identify in amino acid. You're going to have activity in class where you have to classify some molecules based on their functional groups. So kind of look at these and be familiar with them, though you don't have to memorize them. And then a phosphate group has a phosphate in it. This is important in things like DNA. DNA has a lot of phosphate groups. About the backbone, we talked about that in Bio 1. So here they are. Here's a hydroxyl group. Think about hydroxide when we talked about bases, you know. So it's similar to that, except it's bonded to it. Carboxyl groups, carbonyl and then carboxyl. Carbonyl has the carbon and the oxygen. Carboxyl has the hydroxyl plus the carbonyl in it. And these give you some examples of things that would have those, some chemicals or compounds, that would have those with it. And then also some functional properties. What kind of properties does the molecule have based on its functional group? Amino, again, this is going to be something you're going to find in amino acids. Sulfohydryl, so hydryl H and then sulf, having a sulfur. A phosphate, again, this is important like in DNA. It's going to have a phosphate and then a lot of oxygens there. Methyl groups, here's one, you'll see it written like this, C with 3 H's. They don't usually draw out all those H's, they write the H's. You can kind of relate this to methane, the CH4. And then, let's see, ATP is a very important compound in biology. It has a phosphate functional group, and then the rest of it is adenosine, which is part adenine, which is, remember, A from DNA's A, T, G, and C. This is important because it's the energy source for all cells. All cells, if they have to do anything that requires energy, they're using ATP. We'll talk more about this when we get to cellular respiration and cellular respiration and photosynthesis, because we're building and using ATP there. But the way that it actually operates to be a source of energy for our cells is by adding or dropping that phosphate group off of it. And by doing that, it allows us to access or store the energy in that ATP molecule. When we store, we're actually storing energy in the bonds of that phosphate group that we're adding. When we break or drop a phosphate group off, we are actually going to release or access the energy from that molecule. Our cells are going to. So here's ATP. Here's the reason we call it TP. Toilet paper. Okay, sorry, I make jokes too. Is triphosphate, and the reason we have a triphosphate is tri means three. We have 1, 2, 3 phosphates attached to the adenosine. The adenosine again is made out of adenine partly. Okay, and that's it for biological, not biological molecules, that's the next chapter. That's it for the carbon and its importance in cells. Don't forget to write down any questions that you had along the way so we can address them in class.